Sunday, the 22nd of the 11th, 2020. What? Hello. I'll have to do that again because the room is empty. I've got a presentation about Fiat for you. It's quite a big one. I'd get comfortable. Let me just check. Mic check. 1, 2. Fake money. Indeed. There's a lot of fakeness going around at the moment you need to be aware of. Spams, hacks and so forth. There's a lot of printing money, credits. You know, Chancellor of the Exchequer, I'm aware. The Federal Reserve may have gone from private to state control. I have extensively covered monetary mechanics in my due diligence, research and discovery. Some of you are asking and looking at A for V, discharging charges, transfer endorsement, monetary mechanics, private remedy for charges, money, cash, promissory notes, credits. We've done a lot for England, and I'm getting some Americans and family across the pond wanting to know a little bit more in depth about Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Reagan and Thatcher back in the day. Such things as what we've covered a little bit, we've skated around. So in light of current events, this is a presentation that I'm going to do a proofread on. To be fair, you are going to be present for the proofread of fake money, Fiat. And it's done for YouTube as well, so whatever gets said on here will be uploaded to YouTube for the initiates there to have a look, because I have a scribe across the pond, 1 or 2 I believe, so Indie Globe will be getting a copy of this, and we're going to put to bed a few myths and fallacies and give you some case in point, some direction and some structure. This document will form part of the second tier of the Masters Guild, the Sovereign Masters Guild, and you will see why at the end if you stick with it. And I've tried to put in a bit of humour. There's an interesting thing about chefs that will probably get you all, that I'm already aware of, but I'll say it now. I find it incredible, but there you go. So it's quite a big document, as always. We don't do things by halves. And it's been a long time coming, the segments of what I'm about to read to you. So I'd like to say thank you, hello to those listening, Marcus, Cliff, Dean, Steve and Kevin, hello. I'm happy to see you boys. Happy Sunday evening. I've had a great day, I've been productive, and I want to get on with this proofread. And it will form part of where we're going when you're in the private. To be essentially active and functioning correctly, you will need to grasp a great deal of these prerequisites, we'll call them for now, of monetary mechanics. And what, if you've never heard of Fiat, Fiat is the current paper-based system, the debt note system, the promissory note system, Federal Reserve notes, and Bank of England notes. That's your Fiat. And we are awfully forgiving, or we just don't, understand now what's been done to us. We are at an epochal shift, the 4th Industrial Revolution. We got Brother Broseph Klaus of the Schwab, the founder of the World Economics Forum, dropping his hints and tips there about where we're likely to go with the AI and the quantum and the moving on into the new normal. So we are at an epochal shift. A point where the West, we are classified as the West, we're not East, we are a special relationship with the States and etc. We follow in the shadow like a little lovesick puppy. We do as we're told in the elementary hierarchy of the Crown agents and the papacy, etc. So the West could tip into a complacent and quite well-off redundancy, or we could play a decisive role in the future. Okay, simply put, we have a choice, all of us, consciousness, mankind, and across the pond there's a lot more, potential sovereign souls. It's a bigger landmass, so I am reaching out to the stateside primarily. Most of this is applicable and been covered with the Panama Papers and the Bank of England scandal, the BCCI. There is a documentary called The Spider's Web that will complement this. And this news information presentation and study that I'm giving to you is of the work and mouths of intellects, professors. It is peer reviewed. It's not coming directly from me when I express certain things about capitalism or neo, etc. These are just further works and studies. Professor Richard Werner, independent financial. We've been a lot of places, so don't. Before I carry on, don't think that I am endorsing or that this is actually my own, feelings and intent. This is an overread of an eclectic mix of various scholars, academics, previous Wall Street bankers, ones in the trade, economic hitmen. Okay, so you get set up. Don't be judging me I'm just the sage, the message of the ages, with something that you all really should be aware of and ought to know, and not necessarily endorsed by SPLSpro.com, Indiglo, etc. This is an open chat with the fam and the trust regarding monetary mechanics and fiat currency, Bank of England and Federal Reserve, debts, charges, and A for V, bills of exchange, transfer via endorsement, discharging charges. I rest there. So, the banks, what have the banks done? How do we view a bank? What do we do with banks? Why are banks there? What the banks have done in the past is reprehensible. That's why there's outrage at the greed of the bankers when we give them money. I'll go for the 2009 scandal for the Anglo-Britain oils, and America. You can find your own period in time not too long ago, not too far away, where the state bails banks out, and with the money that bails them out, building societies. They actually build societies that we give them that's supposed to help them to lend to others, but they decide to use that money to pay themselves big fat cat bonuses for what? Record losses in general, subprime deals. We are governed by corporations today, and often by corporations that don't have very much interest in England, Britain, UK, GB, the United States of America. And I don't know what happened to the land masses. It was so far in the ditch, where did it all go wrong? Was it disco? Was it Donna Summer? Is that what killed our land masses? We are entering the age of consciousness and the age of a consequence, a rapacious financial system, escalating organised violence, abject poverty for billions, and the looming environmental fallout are converging at a time where governments, religion and mainstream economists have stalled. War, conquest, famine and death, equivalent to the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, are coming in our eyes. We see forward, we can project, we look at history, to be fair, and we look what's happened before. It doesn't take a genius to work out the lack of confidence in this current establishment, and the academic financial layout, as I'm about to bring you, will show you why. This is not a study that sees conspiracies either, okay? It's not a conspiracy theory. The bankruptcy, the insolvencies, the acts and everything that we mentioned will be given to you for those that wonder and require further. It is not a study that is here to monger fear. It's to do quite the opposite. It's just because debt and mental health for 2021, anxiety, low self-esteem, reliance on the state, the incompetent state and its agencies worry us. So this is why we're preempting that possible bunch of negativity with this study here today. So it's not for fear, it's to actually lose the fear and to know. Once you know the secret of the Crown City corporate London entity and the bankers within it, you will no longer fear their demands for repayments. It's not a study that blames bankers or politicians. It's a study that questions the current systems we've created and suggests ways to reform them. Unlike David Icke, unlike the Crow House and such others that have now, Max there, Egan, and they're coming out with all these stark realities and horrific, statistics. We are here to give you both the stark, horrific statistics, the current state of events, and also a mountain load of remedy, exits, reasons, avenues, the other side of the coin. Okay, so take solace in that. Over centuries, these systems, financial systems, political systems, legal systems, lawful systems, language systems, education systems, have been subtly tweaked and modified, manipulated, and even corrupted, often to serve the interests of a few. We have continually accepted these changes, and because man, really, when we look at human, authentic, Homo sapien, Cro-Magnum man can adjust to living under virtually any conditions. The trait that's enabled man to survive and adapt is the very trait that has also maybe suppressed us a little bit. Most societies have an elite, and the elite try to stay in power. I don't call them an elite, but so everybody cognises who we're on about. Yes, the way they stay in power is not merely by controlling the means of production to be Marxist, i.e. controlling the money, but by controlling the cognitive map to the way that ye think and I think. And what really matters in that respect, not so much what is actually said in public, but what is left undebated, what is left unsaid, the language of silence, omittance. For centuries, these gatekeepers have manipulated, arrested development, our cognitive map. And in 1989, a computer scientist by the name of Tim Berners implemented the first successful communication between a HTTP client and server. Ergo, the World Wide Web was indeed allegedly born. It has since unleashed a tsunami of instantly accessible, free and available information, just as Gutenberg's printing press wrestled control of the cognitive map away from an ecclesiastical and royal elite. Gutenberg, preposterous. Today, the internet is beginning to change governments, finance, and indeed the media. Fact checkers out there. You see how things are being contrived. We have the likes of Zuckerberg and Musk and Gates and that man that runs Amazon. I can never remember his name. Billionaire tycoons that are getting involved in areas of our lives and communities of which they really shouldn't be. We will say censorshipping, data controlling, management, media, targeting, adverts, royalties, predictive AI programming. It's quite dark what's gone on, even down to your club card, that monitors what you buy and shop and take, and how the internet, the data, the blockchain technology essentially is what I'm angling at for those that are in the areas of. We are at the cusp of change, to be fair, technologically, financially, spiritually. Money is a technology. It needs to have its ass looked at now. Basically, this is another reason for the video, to look at the financial structure of money, the technology itself, and the way that we use it, the way that it controls. At the minute, we're not using money. I've contradicted myself because it's a study on fiat, which is a fake money. As you will find out, here we go. So the cusp of change. But to be acted, we must first understand the things that have been left unsaid for so long. And to do that, we need context from people who speak the truth in the face of collective delusion. Because to understand something is then to be, in effect, liberated, freed from it. So we're going to look at empires. And an empire, a great power, it has to destroy itself is persist in trying to do the impossible. That's actually a quote. I didn't say that wrong. A great power has to destroy itself is persist in trying to do the impossible. The end of World War II in the States, production wise, in the US of America, They had 50% of the world's gross domestic product. They were making 54,000 aeroplanes a year, 7,000 ships, etc., etc. And they were the new Rome, in effect, if you like. They recognised their power and devised the power management scheme. In 1947, National Security Act. They thought that that would manage it. It worked fairly well, especially during the period of the Cold War. But they haven't really done anything since, and I think that's another sign of the inability to grasp the new world, if you will, because empires do not begin or end on a certain date, but they do end, and the West has not yet come to terms with its fading supremacy, we do believe. And at the end of every empire, under the guise of renewal, you know, tribes, armies and organisations may appear and devour the heritage of the former superpowers, often from within. In his essay, The Fate of Empires, the soldier, diplomat and traveller, Lieutenant General Sir John Glubb analysed the life cycle of empires, and he found remarkable similarities between them all. An empire lasts about 250 years and 10 generations. I'm like, that's not really a long time living, and is it 10 generations or 250 years? It's 25 years a generation, 10 times 25, 250. I don't like them numbers, but that's what's written from the studies and into this document. So there you go. From the early pioneers to the final conspicuous consumers who become a burden on the state. All right, there are 6 ages that define the lifespan of an empire. The first age, the age of pioneers. Second, conquests. Third, commerce. Fourth, affluence. Fifth, intellect. Ending with bread and circuses in the age of decadence. There are common features to every age of decadence: an undisciplined, overextended military, the conspicuous display of wealth, a massive disparity between rich and poor, desire to live off a bloated state, and an obsession with sex. Perhaps the most notorious trait of all is the debasement of the currency. Currency, all right, legal tender and currency, the currency. All right, there you go, the electricity, the energy flow, electricity, current, the volts, the watts, the amps, the currency. The watermark on paper denotes what? It doesn't denote a fancy paper itself. It's if it's come from an institution and it's governmental, normally a watermark would denote currency, which is your bond, you know, a promissory note from the Bank of England. If you hold it up to the light, will have a watermark of the current monarch there, okay, and that's to denote the authenticity for one, and also it's a watermark. The watermark is to denote the current going through the paper. It has a charge to it, which would go and tie into the 1930s onwards technocracy, such things as, but I digress. So the United Kingdom of Great Britain, the United States, both began on gold or a silver standard, which has long since been abandoned, okay? But before we go on to that, we're going to say that Rome, indeedly, Rome was no difference. It started on a principle that was very sound, and it was on a silver standard. But as it corrupted further and further, the Roman denarius got to the point where it was basically a copper coin, as they'd learned how to plate, you know, electroplate, and it was washed in silver, and in circulation, the plating, it came off like. At the end, all the senators that really did at one time represent the people, all that they were only interested in now was, all they were representing was how much wealth they could steal at the top, and they'd become corrupted. Absolute power, absolute corruption. Great empire wealth always dazzles, but beneath the surface, the unbridled desire for money, power and material possessions means that duty and public service are replaced by leaders and citizens who scramble then for the spoils and the breadcrumbs. Historically, all the signs of the demise of an empire are beginning to develop. Some are more trenchant than others. This current financial and economic crisis, that sort of thing always accompanies the demise of empires. It's a tradition. It goes hand in hand like peas in a pod. The people of Rome were constantly being distracted by the gladiatorial or gladiatorial. There we go, gladiatorial. I make life hard for me sometimes. The people of Rome were constantly being distracted by the gladiatorial events, and in the politicians, they knew this. They did this whenever there was unrest with the people. They'd have a huge event going on that created a new event with lots of gladiators every day. This is what's being done now. We are doing that in a way with your media entertainment and the touch of a button, and the way that the comforts that you have. That is a common trade of declining empires. Distraction, weapons of mass distraction is what we call them, fam. And so today, in Britain, in the States, across the pond, for example, you find a tremendous emphasis on all kinds of television, box sets, programs. The Only Way Is, you can, Love Island, the fact that Jeremy Kyle and stuff, people committing suicide over this. It's got to the point where, why, we need to rein that in now. We need to get back to realism, and we've forgotten, we've got lost, we've become preoccupied in some ways, chasing something which is immaterial. Distract people from really what's going on. Sports is a big part, as it was in gladiator times. I'll leave it there. In essence, we've been lulled into a lethargy and we've accepted it. We've ushered it in. Just as our sports stars today earn vast sums, so did Roman charioteers in the 2nd century. One by the name of Gaius Appius Diocles amassed a fortune of 35 million sesterces in prize money, equivalent to several $1 billion today, so I'm led to believe. Strangely, perhaps, there's another profession. Here we go, ears up. I could not Adam and Eve this. This is the bit, out of all of this presentation, this is the bit that everyone's going to remember. Like when you go to see a stand-up comedian, and you watch him for an hour and a half, and then you wake up the next day and you go, what did I like about? And you can't think of anything, or just one or two things stick out. Well, this is the bit that, now I've done this, you'd argue that I've put it in to stick out, but no, I assure you, it may or may not now. I've built it up, so I hope you enjoy it. Strangely, perhaps, there's another profession that is disproportionately hallowed as an empire declines. The Romans, the Ottomans, and the Spanish all made celebrities of their chefs. Now just think about that. Just have a moment. I'm talking to my Britons now. The Briton, the landmass, terra firma, known as formerly the artist as the United Kingdoms. How many chef programs have we had recently? Master Chef, Gordon, I can't stop effing and blaring Ramsay. Too many to mention. I'm not here to mention them, but strangely, perhaps, the profession that is disproportionately hallowed, as if there's any clear sign that an empire's declining initiates, well, it's when we glorify the chefs, because the Romans, the Ottomans, and the Spanish alike all made celebrities of their chefs at the point of the demise. Moving on. And this again is typifying the end of an empire where things were so great. We have this last oomph of momentum that we used to be great and we felt great, but we don't feel it anymore. Yes, hello. So everyone is out searching for it. Well, maybe it's in the best food, or it's in the, or in the best clothes, or it's in the best music, best movies, or a reality TV show, or maybe another magazine. You can never get enough of what you don't need. What you need, what ye need, what thy needs, what I need, I and un-I, is a strong moral conviction that is pervasive throughout the society, and integrity shall reign throughout. There's a vast apathy, there's a vast amoralism, even a political nature to it. That is to say, there are vast numbers of womb man, who don't give a rat's ass. And so there's this natural beauty, I suppose, entropy. Any living organism which is an empire is, of course, over time dies. Any living organism, which an empire is, of course, yes, and it's an entity, yes, an organism, an organisation, okay? So where you say, no, Dave, an empire is clearly not an organism. An organism is like what we've got with COVID and proper, disease and that. Organisms making man sick like. Well, you have an organisation, and when you break that word down furthermore and get into the etymological roots of the organ is at ion, and then you look at ions, Zion, lion, don't get me there, because we'll stray from the path and the jungle is massive. Then we do bump into the lion of Zion. You need to get your eye on and get the fly on, because by Joe, he will get the eye on. Enough said. Accidental stumble. It happens. With God's help, I will conquer this terrible affliction. But organisation in itself, as we find with the legalese that we're indoctrinated at school, they teach you such things as your name is. My name is not Slim Shady. My name is Slim of the Shady, of the fam, Shady, of the clan Shady. A name is an object or a noun, teacher. It describes a thing. It starts with a capital letter. I, man, creation of, image of, creator, God there, God not being a respecter of persons, legal entity, warning, teacher. I know I should have gone to an RC school, look what you've done. So they by proxy teach in the school of indoctrination, give me the child and I shall show you the man. Who said that and why? You see, we'll cover that later on in the document, but I'm just greasing the wheels for you. For those that might need a break and a pause, I fully understand. This is the roller coaster of finance, education, indoctrination of the nation for the emancipation of the sovereign self-initiates. I don't take joy in what we speak about, but we like to unravel it and let you know it goes deep. So when we go to organisations and organisms, which an empire is, of course, it will die. And the question now you're asking me is, Dave, how will that die? How does it die? Does it die in a violent cascade of events, or does it die over a long period of time? Well, I said we're at a crossroads. That is to be seen. There was such a thing as a baby boomer generation. They were born into an age of decadence, perhaps unwittingly. They've broken the unspoken silent intergenerational contract. What's that? Through unfettered consumerism, spiralling house prices and the desire for eternal youth, the baby boomers have squandered future generations' inheritance, don't you know? What? Yes, my generation, that generation, what generation, this generation, Pepsi generation, right after the generation. I think we forgot that little phrase in the American Constitution there, the preamble to that Constitution of the US of A, which says, and our posterity. All of a sudden it become ye, the baby boom generation, which some of you may and may not have been part of. It depends on the demographic of the viewers at the time of the cast and the stream. So they may have done the biggest misallocation of capital in the history of humankind, mankind. We have had, you have had, they have had, cheap oil energy is a better way to phrase it, an abundance of energy, and chosen a system and help that system be perpetuated. Peter Piper picked a peckle, pickle pepper. That is probably one of the worst ways to use the blessings that are bestowed upon us, man, and we are going to pay a price for that. You're going to pay a price for that. It's not a threat, it's just the laws and the way that they work, and balance shall be restored. Human beings are in fact an inconsistent and quite a paradoxical entity when they're looked at, because we hope for peace and immortality, but continually invent new ways to destroy each other. Man is capable of the kindest, most noble act, and at the same time the most horrific atrocities. But I know Noam Chomsky there, I've got to say, when I say there's some scholars and intellects and minds, it's a bit of Noam. Human beings are complex creatures. I mean, for example, we're capable right now at this minute of acting in such a way as to make it likely, if not certain, that our grandchildren are going to face terrible disasters. And we are consciously acting to accelerate that likelihood, even though we love our grandchildren. How can you, ye, I, man, be more contradictory than that? I implore you, ye. In spite of all the economic activities of the last 50, 60, 70 years since World War II, that's what we say over here in Anglo, we don't say WW2, World War II. Yanka told me that. English, she's got to say, she gets marked down for saying anything other than World War II. The Second World War gets marked down. WW2 gets marked down. So World War II and all the various industrializations, man has not yet managed to solve the problem of poverty, deprivation, hunger, malnutrition. Millions of people every night go to bed without food, and millions of people are throwing away their food. Waste on the one hand, and poverty and deprivation and hunger on the other hand. Malnutrition on one hand and obesity on the other hand. The East starve whilst the West get fat. What kind of system has indeed been created? Why, with such brilliant knowledge, technology on the planet, realm, as Boris said the other day when he's on about the government budgets and whatnot, the realm needs to be protected. So why, with such brilliant knowledge on the planet, as in Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, Chief Executive of the UKGB, and the First Lord of the Treasury, are we still struggling to distribute wealth fairly? How has the human race developed a flawed system of government and economics that serves the few at the expense of the many? And with such poverty in an age of plenty, why have we not had the will to change such a vicious social structure? I ask you, whilst you're all pointing out various things, greed is the fundamental kind of ingredients for the immoral economy. The problem is not that there's not enough in the world. People say that there's poverty and we have to create more wealth. There is enough in the world for everybody. Need, as Mahatma Gandhi may have said, but not for anybody's greed. Is it just greed, or does it go deeper than that? Is the problem systemic? We're going to look at banking now, corporate city of London, and we're going to include the Federal Reserve, and then we're going to use some other such big names as. When plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men living together in society, they create for themselves in the course of time a legal system that authorises it and a moral code that glorifies it. What? Yes. Sustained is what they said in the House when the Lords put that one through. As a culture, civilization, entity, family, community, we've obviously had a great run. We've seemed to have done very well up to this point here. We've had the Industrial Revolution, we survived that. We built a lot of modern military technology, we've survived that thus far. We built a banking system, and yet we're still struggling with that part of it, aren't we? But we've had a good run so far. It's kind of like when these men that I've looked at, spoken to, had feedback to, Max Kaiser mentioning here now, working on Wall Street for 7 years. He had the experience some people would have say, like working at a meat processing plant, he compared it to. When you work at a meat processing plant, you might then become a vegetarian. So once you working on Wall Street for 7 years, you might not want to look at money the same as when you work with meat. You might want to then become a vegetarian. You see, you work on Wall Street and you see how these banks at Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan and the other banks make money. When you see money, it kind of makes you sick. He thinks if people knew what the banking system is up to, as Henry Ford said, there would be a revolution tomorrow morning. Do you see how I dropped in the nice sturdy references there of what those two would have said and thought about it, and why there indeed should be a revolution tomorrow morning with regards to money, credit, cash, debts, exchequer, chancery, Chancery, wrong one, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mr. Rishi Sunak, the furlough scheme. When you understand about what these have in their capability with the itinerary of the financial fiscal system and what we could delete and start. This document I'm going to get there, so this is where I'm going, but I was thinking that, bear with me. The fact is that most people think that what a bank does is lend you money that someone else puts into the bank previously. And what a bank actually does, what a commercial bank actually does, is to create money from nothing and then lend it at interest, is what everybody up until this point has told you. But they're not actually creating money out of nothing. If you know about the accounts and the trusts that have been set up at the point of registration, and when you've heard Treasury Direct accounts worth your weight in gold, you are due a share of the Earth's mineral and energy reserves. We're all in Chapter 11 bankruptcy, so there is now all debts are paid. So this is where then the TDA and the trust accounts come into it, where you would then look at using a promissory note, as in the point of a mortgage, what you're finding out with the mortgage disclosure that is happening. And when you actually sign that agreement, you create the money, and it's an actual promissory note, which is a financially, I've covered this as well, and I've given you the case law on Indiglo, and I'll repost it again in the links of this video, which is actually the special purpose vehicle side of it, which is the bits of the accounting and banking. That's how they the core parts. So you know, when we say they create money from nothing, that's a fallacy. All of these thought leaders and ones that have led you up to this point really ought to be pointing out that there are a public side of finance and there's a private side of finance, and depending on your status, standing and capacity, you will be acting in a certain way. Drawer scenario. You know, we've said debtor, creditor, etc. That's correct to some parts, a grantor, settlor, trustee, beneficiary. So then you are actually commissioning an equitable instrument in the form of a promissory note and giving it to the bank, giving them money, which is then, in a nutshell, they give back to you and loan at interest, securitize it, insure it, and it's all. So that is coming out, and it's been proven. No bank has ever lent any money. So banks don't actually strictly, with credit creation, Professor Richard Werner has pointed out that there is fractional reserve and credit creation where they do create digits, and so there was nothing there. You want a 40 grand loan, they will put 40 grand in an account, but they just put some digits in. That bit's created, and the paper that you sign to pay that 40 grand back in the form of a bank loan acts as the promissory note and an instrument of a financial nature, of which they will securitize, bond, and it will become a prime, a subprime, or a such and such. So when we say they create money out of nothing, why I need to tell you this, and we need to stress this, is because it isn't quite true in some instances, and where we come in with the bills and the transfer and the endorsement and the commercial alternatives too, which is the 1882 bills of exchange, nothing to do with what you're asking me about. You're asking me how you would accept for value and use financial discharge payment methods there. So you would accept it. It's got a value to it. You can add value, you can accept it for value, you can return it for value. It's a process of which you must get to know, to look at. We'll expand on that later, and what all that value is and where the value is. Is it a bill? Does it conform to a bill? Or is it a statement? And is it in a statement of an account? And does it have charges there which need to be looked at and then accepted, and someone needs to be authorised to discharge them with the given? So banks, if they manufacture money, that's one thing. But if we do manufacture money, it's called counterfeiting. If an accountant creates money out of nothing in the company accounts, it's called cooking the books. But if a bank does it, it seems to be perfectly legal. So as long as you allow fraud to be legalised, then all kinds of problems are likely to pop up in the economic system, as you can't do anything about them. Private banks create money out of nothing and lend it at interest. Now that sounds absurd when a teacher, in a university, teaching sophomores and graduates and students about money and banking, and they're trying to say, what? Tell me that again. And yes, banks really do create money. They really do. Here's how it happens, and it's absurd. They're right to doubt that. Students that are learning this actually doubt what they're being taught, and it could possibly actually be what is going on, but it is. Now, the banks lobby is very strong. They're going to say, they don't want to change this system, and they're making a lot of money out of it. What they have to try and do is try and convince the people that it's their fault, that their wage claims perhaps are too high, and that's why we're having lots of inflation, or people are speculating on houses, and that's why house prices may be going up. What they're not going to say is that this is happening because banks are creating money out of nothing and pumping it into the system. That's why prices are going up. So if we just segue there, if you and I keep using promissory notes, £10 notes, £20 notes, £50 notes when you get to see them, £5 notes to pay debts and bills and transfer, to get balances transferred clear, then we're adding to the national debt, because those notes need to be printed by private bankers that lend it to the government at a fee, you see. But it's just blank bits of paper that they put a pretty pattern on and some numbers on, but they have the numbers because those numbers are related to the debt, that there's the national debt, and people are attached to the national debt via the Constitution. All right, so there's some grey areas you need to ears up and go and cross-reference, especially for America. We've actually printed the on Indigo community page, and others have taken the section of the Constitution which points out how the persons are responsible for the national debt in that chapter. But how is it that we've ended up with a system in which the banks have the power to create money, everybody? Well, stateside, since 1971, when President Nixon took the United States of what was left of the gold standard, the world is operated under a system of money known as fiat. The dollar, the pound and the euro are all government fiat currencies. Fiat is a Latin word, okay? Word fans, bit of word porn coming up. What does it mean? What does fiat mean in Latin, everybody? It means let it be so. It is the law that this government currency be money. Indeed, without that legal enforcement and the fact that we must pay taxes with this money, that dollar bill or that computer digit that represents a dollar would be pretty much meaningless. Only the government has the power to issue fiat money. Banks can create it through lending. Over the last 40 years, since this system of fiat money became the global norm, the supply of money has grown exponentially. In fact, we've seen the greatest growth in the supply of money in history. But who is likely to benefit from this? Of course, those that have the power to issue money, governments and banks, and then those companies and individuals that get this money early, because they can spend it before the prices of the things they want to buy have risen to reflect the new money in circulation. In other words, initiates, they get services, products or assets cheap, but prices soon rise. As the money falls down the pyramid, the prices rise. Inflation. So holders of assets such as houses or shares will then see gains, or will likely see gains. I'm not giving any financial advice out on this video whatsoever. There is no liability and no investment advice, and you get me, fam. But you're likely to see gains without there necessarily being any improvements to the company or house or asset in question. Often this can lead to speculative bubbles. What about those at the bottom of the pyramid, those on fixed wages or incomes, those who live in remote areas? Of those remote areas, or those with savings, by the time this newly created money has filtered down to them, the prices of the things they want to buy have then increased due to inflation. Their savings buy them less now. However, their wages remain largely unchanged. In some cases, they have to take on debt just to be able to afford the things they were previously able to buy, which means they have to go back to the banks. We'll look at Grenfell cladding and the fact there are people in houses and flats in Britain now that have bought their own apartment, and due to the quality of the ACM cladding material, it's been graded by the assessors for the mortgage assessments have said that you can't get a mortgage on a property that's got fire retardant cladding on it that's more combustible than petrol. So it's failed its safety check, and the owners that have bought this buildings and properties have to pay in the region of £80,000 to get that seen to, and if they don't get up to grade and get it seen to, they could get their homes repossessed. But yet they was defrauded when they bought the property because it was marked up as safe, and yet they've got this aggregate flammable cladding on it, of which they're now liable to have taken off. that's just one example on a tangent of how you get into debt very quickly by no fault of your own in a legal process as well. And you could end up losing your house and having nothing for doing nothing wrong, for some company lying about the I'll move on. In reality, this process of creating money only redistributes wealth from the bottom to the top of the pyramid. And thus that ever-increasing gulf between rich and poor gets bigger and bigger and bigger. A bit like the Nun. In the beginning there was the Nun. There was nothing. It was dark and vast. Well, when you get off the gold standard and you go into a fiat money currency combined with a fractional reserve banking system initiates, you end up compounding debt faster than you could ever possibly produce to support that compounding debt. So eventually you're going to find yourself back into what's known as good old debt slavery. That's what's happened for every, give an example, dollars and US talk here, for every dollar of GDP, for example, in the US now, this also creates something like $5.50 worth of debt. Yeah, so because this is what happens in the economy, it flips over and basically capsizes. And of course the government solution now is to address all the problems, is to create more debt. That's what Rishi Sunak is doing, is printing and printing and printing and billions and millions. It's worrying, it really is. It's unprecedented times, and there is a plan afoot. And before they move us all over to chips and pins and digital, I believe this is one of the last points in time, a last bastion to try and get some of this information and critical criteria into the minds of man, so you and I can make a decision and inform our illustrious governments, leaders and etc. institutions as and what we would require, as we're all quite sick of where we're at. You can never get enough of a currency that doesn't work. You can print it, Rishi Sunak, into kingdom come, but you can't, get yourself out of debt by making more debt initiates, and that's a fact. If you could print wealth, then the likes of Zimbabwe would be the largest, most prosperous country on the planet. We all know it doesn't work. Of the money in the world today, 97% of it is debt. Another way of looking at it, of all of the money in the world, the notes. The French philosopher Voltaire once said, all paper money eventually will return to its intrinsic value, zero. For 3 generations, the world watched a fight between capitalism and communism. But in the 1980s, the Russian economy started to collapse. The Soviet Union capitulated and so-called capitalism reigned supreme. And before 1989, we had a battle between communism and the market. And in that battle, there was a sense of let's not expose the flaws in the market economy. This is too important of a battle that you don't criticise our team while we're fighting their team, and their team social authoritarianism with a failure to deliver, a well-being to their society. It was very clear that if you had to choose between these two, which one would be better? Communism failed first through various reasons, we would say through inefficient human rights, lack of respect, so forth. And capitalist West has been continuing in a triumphalist mode, thinking, our adversary has failed. That means we're doing everything right, I suppose. Both systems are trying to do something which is fundamentally impossible, grow forever. And they're both going to fail. One failed first, and capitalism is going to fail no later, or it's failing now right before our eyes. Like when the pioneers went over to the West because the lands had run out and they needed to explore, it's now in a very interesting position, because in the past 200 to 300 years of its history, its culture and country, which has almost existed on the assumption that resources could be further expanded. If there was a problem, they always seem to try to deal with it by expanding the slice of the pie. Go west, young man, make the pie bigger so that everybody's got a bigger slice of the pie, a bigger piece. Now it's facing a world where possibly resources are being to be more constrained, and where it's going to have to divide up that pie and inflict pain on its mans. And you can contrast that to Italy, France, Britain, everywhere, all governments, Hungary, Poland. Have a look at the news. And that's something which is not well prepared for. How our countries moved so far from the intentions of their founding fathers, constitutions, charters, rights, the common law, I'll even say. How have countries moved so far from their common laws and intentions of any, or, depending on your nation, landmass, and etc. If you are a republic like the Southern Republic of Ireland, I envy you. You looky, beep, beep. Much love. How does the dream become so distorted? Over the last 30 or 40 years, capitalism has taken this extreme form, and a lot of it goes back to the economist Milton Friedman. He was from the Chicago School. Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. Here's the special relationship with the US that I said we'd tie in. We've always had the United Kingdom and etc. a special relationship following the US around like a lovesick puppy. But Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, quasi-type trust, privatisation. I did mention this and we've sketched on this above and beyond before, so it is quite critical to re-tie it back in. And others buying into these policies that really encourage people to try to take on huge amounts of debt, encourage, such things as privatisation, smaller government supposedly, although they got bigger military budgets, so actually government spending went up massively. Deregulation, getting rid of rules that govern the people who run our institutions, especially at corporations. It is though we suddenly are supposed to believe that the human beings or the chief execs that sit at the top of corporations, Bill Gates, Zuckerberg, Musk, and the man that I can't think that has Amazon, don't need to be regulated, and that they are some sort of gods. Milton Friedman, his protégés, the Chicago boys, and the neoclassical ideology beat the classical approach to economics and became the framework for what we today call capitalism. There are two main competing economic approaches which determine how we humans manage the world and distribute the wealth. These are the classical and neoclassical schools of thought. The classical school favours less government interference, more personal autonomy, and recognises that humans cannot function without natural resources. Doesn't sound too bad. The neoclassical school, which has a more dismissive view of nature and natural resources, thinks government should rule the economy, solve social problems, and leave the free market to look after the distribution of wealth. The neoclassical school emerged about 100 years ago due to vested interests' desire to protect their assets. This meant that neoclassical mathematical models and assumptions were divorced from reality. Reality. They are based on what ought to be, instead of the classical models which are based on what actually is. It's these neoclassical models which favour large corporations that have been used to legitimise the financialisation of the global economy championed by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. The neoclassical economy and economists still dominates policy making today. The Reagan revolutions, we call it these days, obviously the Reagan-Thatcher revolution. Think about it more realm-wide and globally. It was a big change in power structure and a big transfer of opportunity and wealth. Now it's not that the poor gave it the rich. It was transferred within the well-to-do, so that the financial sector in particular, the United Kingdom, the United States, for example, also, UK and some other places became vastly more profitable, and wages in that sector went up a lot. We focus on bonuses, but it's also base salaries went up for overall compensation. So there's a transfer from the non-financial part of the economy to the financial part of the economy. That actually is is hard to say, is unprecedented as far as we can see in any of the available data to the scribes and researchers, and we are talking about all of recorded human history, Michael Jackson history. In 1983, in the place to be. In 1932, in the aftermath of the America's great stock market crash, a piece of legislation was passed to protect that society. The Glass-Steagall Act was introduced to separate ordinary high street banking from investment banking. 67 years later, in 1999, under the influence of Treasury Secretary Larry Summers and his predecessor Robert Rubin, President Bill Clinton repealed the Glass-Steagall Act. Once again, banks could take ordinary depositors' money and speculate with it virtually on anything they liked. That would be Wall Street, the wailing Wall Street there, and that's not Bond Street because it's American Clinton. Wall Street has become and obviously Bond Street can be tied in with this commentary here, has become a very particular type of casino, and it's unfortunately not the kind and type of casino that they have in Las Vegas, which is allegedly a perfectly legal, legitimate form of entertainment, a way to ruin your life. It is a casino that has massive negative repercussions on the rest of society, our societies, man's society. It's not just losing your money on a few wild nights out. It's about the way in which those organisations lose their money, impacting the whole of society, leading to a massive loss of jobs, we'll say. This unfettered gambling pushed the entire global financial system to near collapse a few times now, with balances and debt obligations larger than the GDP of entire countries. The banks had become too big to fail. And banks in the West, unprepared, the bankers met their reeling and disorientated government saying, you have to bail us out. We need money. If you don't give us the money, the whole thing's going down. And what you're going to do with millions and tens of millions of people who have lost everything in their bank account? You will have a goddamn revolution on your head. So fork over the money, borrow the money, create it out of nothing and give it back to us so that we can face our problems and not go under. Otherwise, this is, it's going to be game over. And there was a man there called Mr. Hank Paulson. He walked into the US Congress. He went in there one day and he told them they need $700 billion. We need it now or else. 700 billion. That's right. Is this system we called capitalism really capitalism? In a capitalist system, government is supposed to be small. Today, the state, the United Kingdom, the health departments, etc., are more bloated and invasive than they have ever been. Individuals and companies are supposed to operate in a free market. Good enterprise is rewarded with profit, and flawed enterprise is met with failure. During the 2008 banking crisis, the people saw the economic system divided in a way they were told could never happen. Socialism for the rich, capitalism from the poor. And in America, for example, the banks that got into trouble got bailed out by government. That's socialism. And there are people arguing against socialism in America, and yet it's probably the most socialist country in the world right now. How's about that? We have a system which isn't even a proper capitalist system, where people make mistakes, they don't get punished, they don't go to prison, to jail. Poor people make mistakes, they get civilly prosecuted, they get took over, they get charging orders of an equitable nature, repossessions, foreclosures, you name it. So enough is enough on that front as well. Even worse, the working man, they don't make any mistakes, but they're forced to pay for the mistakes of the rich. When the taxpayer is footing the bill for the misplaced speculation of bankers, then here at splspro.com and at Indiglo, we don't take kindly to that. Suddenly, instead of the economy serving the man there, the man is now being asked to serve the economy in perpetual service to amoral financial organisations. What? Exactly. Correct me if I'm wrong. It was the head of the Federal Reserve Bank, Alan Greenspan, who after 9/11 slashed the interest rates to encourage lending. Bankers needed new participants to keep cash flowing in a system that had become a global pyramid scheme. All this newly created money entered the housing market and created unprecedented inflation. House prices rose. New mothers were forced back into the workplace to service huge home loans, and the Anglo-American dream became all about land speculation. The housing market in the West isn't about ownership. The housing market in the West, it's because the only way ordinary people can't get ahead, ordinary people can't get ahead by wages. And what they've created, a mass bubble economics around housing. It sucks in a huge amount of capital, takes capital for genuine innovations in the economy and puts it into a speculative use that has no genuine productive outcome. It's interesting, if you talk to people in Germany, for example, they don't see a connection between owning a piece of property and they be inclined towards being democratic, as lots of people who rent their housing, and they're perfectly comfortable with that arrangement. It's true that in somewhat different contexts, both Mr. Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher pushed far more people to own their own homes. And actually, this is part of the problem, because if you indeed push and force man to buy housing before they're ready, and if you push very dubious loans on them, subprime, and they don't understand what they're getting themselves into, you will more likely have an adverse repercussions later down the line, exactly what led in part to the subprime housing crisis. It's not anything to do about democracy, it's just bad economic ideas and practices, immoral, unethical. The breakthrough that occurred around the euro in the United States was when bankers found out that the poor were honest, and they realised that if you're poor and you're not rich, you have a different set of values, and you think a debt is a debt and something that has to be paid. And man will try to pay the debts that they're stuck with, even if the debts are not valid, even if the debts are much more than they expected, even if they really can't pay the debts. The lending and banking institutions, when they draw up contracts with interest rates, with flexible interest rates, they know in the beginning that these problems are going to come back later on man, and they're not going to be able to afford the mortgages as the interest rate increases. Endowment mortgages were sold and failed in England for 80s period, and man had trouble with that. They already knew that was coming. Missold policies, missold PPI. They put a lot of people in situations where they're basically taking food out of your mouths, out of the cupboards, out of the fridges. They're taking your assets, young blood, out of school, out of college, out of academies, higher education. You're not able to afford college and things anymore. It's getting really, really bad, and situations are getting worse. The bank's engaged in what is a criminal conspiracy, furthermore, to charge more for the darker skinned family, namely blacks and Hispanics. The banks got together back in the Bush administration to block the state prosecutions of racial lending in order to charge more to the minorities. These loans, which were made by one of the major lenders in the city and in the country, Wells Fargo, in which Wells Fargo targeted minority communities in American cities, put borrowers into loans they could not afford, that were of the subprime variety, therefore more expensive and less advantageous to the borrowers. Hiding predatory lending practices in the small print of complex financial products was only ever going to enrich one set of interests. Many of the communities in which African Americans live in the city were establishing the momentum. There was development activity that was occurring. There were signs of vitality in many of these communities, and the results of the Wells Fargo foreclosures and the subprime lending practices of that lender and others has significantly impaired that progress and brought it to a head. What happened in a place called Baltimore is just one example of what is happening all around the world. One way to frame this injustice is by branding it a racist issue. But when we look really closely, we can see that there is something at play here that indeed transcends race. It's called profit. Not an accident, for instance, that we had the deregulation of financial industry that was such a disaster. The lobbyist for the finance industry amount to 5 per MP or congressperson, really. Typically there's about 5 on one man, 5 to 1. They pay 5 people for every MP, congressman equivalent, to explain to them, persuade them that they should pass legislation that is favourable to the financial industry. Okay, they have to stay in the lobby. They can only remain in the lobby, and they're lobbyists. That's as far as they can go. The poor people who were devastated don't have the money. They couldn't hire 5 per MP or congressman, etc. The way our democracy works, it's an unlevel playing field. The financial sector is quite enormous power, partly through political contributions, and they can buy favours, mostly through ideological control, convincing people that finance is good. More finance is better, more finance all around. And unregulated finance without limit is best. And that is what really, the cornerstone of this, what we call, Bond Street and Wall Street, corporate city of London, the Bank of England and the Federal Reserve, corridors of. If man needs any proof as to who's controlling London, England, Washington, anywhere that has the euro, the dollar and the pound, fiat, all fiat currencies, when the bailouts come after, like the Lehman Brothers collapsed, is another bank to mention that's big and well known. 80% of the population was against the bailout across the pond, notwithstanding that Congress passed the bailout, just showing in view anyway that it's really under the control of the banking interests. It's not a reflection of good democracy when a company or group of companies and industry says our interests are more important than the national interest. What? It's exactly what's going on, fam. How could that happen? Very easily. That's the role of campaign contributors lobbying in political structure, as we have a flawed democracy. There's an advanced oligarchy in the sense that its main mechanism of control, if you like, is through convincing people that you really need, for example, the 6 biggest banks in their particular form exist today with the very light level of regulation. And if you don't have them, if you try to change that, all kinds of awful things that will happen. And it's not really blackmail. It sounds like blackmail, but they convince you it's the way the world is. And there's nothing you can do about it. Oh my goodness, you're just going to have to cooperate with them. It's very, very clever what they've done there. The Bank of England, the Federal Reserve, is essentially the lobbyist for the commercial banking system. When you say you want to turn regulation over, you're saying the financial sector, Bond Street and Wall Street should be self-regulated, and Bond Street has veto power over whoever is going to be the head of the Federal Reserve, as far as it is for Wall Street. As long as you give veto power over the regulators to Wall Street, as long as you pick the bank regulators from the banking industry itself, you can forget any thought of going at regulation. It is deregulation, and to call it regulation instead of deregulation is using Orwellian doublethink. Democracy is government by the people. Plutocracy is government by the rich. In a typical plutocratic state, economy inequality is high, social mobility low, and because of continuous exploitation of the masses, workers find it nearly impossible to climb out of poverty. The equal voting rights movement in the early 20th century abolished a system where rich people had more votes than poor people. Today, lobbying has put pay to that and reduced the American political system. I'm looking at this because of obviously what's happened there with the 2 boys and the current voting, facade there between Trump and and Biden. The American political system to a mere clearinghouse for the concerns of the rich. The Goldman Sachs machine is one of using profits to buy influence in Washington, to change laws to make it easier to make money on Wall Street, to be used to buy influence in Washington. It's a self-reinforcing malfeasance machine that is continuing to grow as a parasite in the economy and continuing to kill the host. Famous for claiming, yes, I really mean that. Let me read that again. The Goldman Sachs machine is one of using profits to buy influence in Washington, to change laws to make it easier to make money on Wall Street, to be used to buy influence in Washington.
It is indeed a self-reinforcing malfeasance machine that is continuing to grow as a parasite on and in the economy and continuing to kill the host. Famous for claiming it did God's work, Goldman Sachs is one of the most influential investment banks of the entire realm. Its alumni often occupy positions of great influence in governments and indeed central banks. In September 2008, barely a month before the stock market crash, Goldman, supposedly a pillar of the free market, changed its banking status from investment to commercial. This meant it was now eligible for state protection. Socialism for the rich, right there. Goldman Sachs are extremely efficient at what they do. Their task is to make money, and they make bank robbers like Willie Sutton look like modest amateurs. There are huge bank robbers, they are indeed, but it's legal. The system is set up so they can do it. In recent years, they've been selling securities put together from mortgages that they know were worthless. So they're selling these things to unwitting customers, making a ton of money on it. Meanwhile, they are betting that they're going to fail because they know that they know that they are peddling this rotten deals. So they place bets with the credit default swaps in other things with a huge insurance company, Alpha, Indigo, Golfer, AIG, and that was insuring Goldman Sachs against the failure of the stuff that they're knowingly peddling. During America's subprime collapse, Goldman traders Michael Swenson and Josh Birnbaum made a $4 billion profit by short-selling junk mortgages. Backed by Dan Sparks, internationally, Goldman Sachs called their position the Big Short and bet against their own clients. Senator Carl Levin called Goldman Sachs Chief Executive Lloyd Blankfein to a Senate subcommittee to testify under oath. Much has been said about the supposedly massive short Goldman Sachs has on the US housing market. The fact is, we're not consistently or significantly net short on the market. In residential mortgage related products in 07 and 08, we didn't have a massive short against the housing market, and we certainly did not bet against our clients. Riding the Big Short in 2007 made billions of dollars for Goldman, and so far they've got away scot-free with this massive heist. They are now back, bigger than before, richer than before. Biggest profits they've had in history. Huge bonuses. They're doing great. A lot of what they're doing, in fact, probably maybe all of it, has almost nothing to do with you, and it doesn't benefit the economy. Can there be any objection to genuinely talented people earning big money if they bring something new and tangible into the world? If they take great personal risks with their own money and actually bring greater prosperity for all? In a free market, if you have a brilliant idea that a car could run on grass clippings, for an example, and you produce a car, your motivation might be to make money. And if the market says that, my goodness, this is one of the greatest ideas and cars ever invented by humankind, and you make $1 million from that, $1 billion from that, not only have you served yourself, you've served everybody else that needs transportation. That is the brilliance of a free market. It's that paradox. You could serve yourself and simultaneously serve others, and that's what it's all about. How many of the general public have achieved greater prosperity through a banker's bonus? I ask you, how many of the general public have achieved greater prosperity through a banker's bonus? Only if they're family related to them and they spend nice on you at Crimbo or your birthday, I imagine you would actually have a bonus and prosper through that banker's bonus. It was against the holy backdrop of St Paul's Cathedral in London that Goldman Sachs here we go, we've gone back to London. Go on, Dave. Oh, my son, he does look after us, don't he? He's gone back to London 10. It was against the holy backdrop of St Paul's Cathedral. That's Paul with a W, P-A-W-L, Paul Cathedral in London that Goldman Sachs vice chairman and mouthpiece Lord Griffiths, I'm Lord Griffiths, okay, he gave insight into how certain bankers really think. Would you like to know, initiates, what Lord Griffiths' insight onto how certain bankers really think was? The devoted Christian defended exonerate bonuses. I'm not a person of despair, I'm a person of hope, and I think that we have to tolerate the inequity as a way to achieving greater prosperity and opportunity for all. What's that? I don't want to swear like, but what the bleep? You're down the rabbit hole now. What did he say? What did he say? Lord Griffith said what about them? I'm not a person of despair, I'm a person of hope. And I think we have to tolerate the inequality as a way to achieving greater prosperity and opportunity for all. So one of their own, we big up lords and we reference them and we shout out about them, but Lord Griffiths, shame on you. You think that we have to tolerate the inequality of financial institutions as a way to achieving greater prosperity and opportunity to all. I think we've got a song about that, haven't we, Kevin? I do believe, fam, initiates. You can shove that right up the fundamental Christian view, and I would say of Islam, and as well certainly of Judaism, is that wealth should be shared. Money, fiat, credit, energy, life has to be shared. You can't take it with you, fam. And from that develops a whole lot of stuff about justice and the economy and so on. We'll leave that there, segue open. And we've lost that, you know, and instead we've got people accumulating more and more. Bezos, Amazon man, Bezos came to me, look. Thank you, brain. Bit late, we're in the middle of something else now. And you just think, initiates, indigos, light workers, crystals, sovereigns, common law man thinks that shit stinks. That people have lost their homes, they've lost their jobs, they cannot pay their mortgages because bankers who make big mistakes and then whom are paid enormous bonuses. I'm sorry, this is simply wrong. I can't understand why are we not more vociferous about when rich people tell you that they specifically have to be rich, you know, these egregious laws, you know, rip-off mechanisms that are just self-serving propaganda and should be disregarded and treated with the contempt they duly deserve. It is true that if you organise human society, some people get ahead and some people struggle. That's just natural mechanisms. But saying, oh, well, we've got to have inequality, therefore Goldman Sachs must be organised along the following lines. That's a complete non-sequential. At what juncture, at what point does morality enter into economic calculus? In a way, many people think that Adam Smith gave us a free pass, us over the pond again, a way not to think about morality, because what Adam Smith said, there was that individuals in the pursuit of their self-interest are led as if by an invisible hand to the general well-being of society. And let me make it clear, Adam Smith didn't really say that. That is to say that Adam Smith was very much aware that when businesses, when they get together, conspired against the public interest. Look at my grocery post and what I've put up on the post there recently, cattle, grocery, etc. on the Indiglo community page and in Facebook SPLs and on the private domain. I think all three have mirrored quite a lot of posts similar lately to give you a boost in the right areas. He was aware of the monopoly. He was aware of the importance of education that the private sector couldn't provide. So he himself is aware of all the limitations. His latter-day descendants have forgotten all those caveats. Adam Smith was looked at as the godfather of classical economics, but those that don't know, who's Adam Smith, Dave? Is he Batman? Was that Batman, Adam Smith? I think that was Batman, weren't it, back in the day on TVAM at 20:07 in the morning before exercise with... No, it wasn't. That was Adam someone else. Adam Smith was allegedly the godfather of classical economics. Since its publication, his work has been used as a political football. Financiers twisting his words to suit them. Lord Griffith advocates ruthless individualism to push this idea that if bankers get rich, then we all get rich too, initiates. You know, the bankers all look after us. They're very good. They're well known for sharing, aren't they? Though a process known as trickle-down economics or horse and sparrow theory. That's right, fam. Horse and sparrow theory. I want you to duck that and have a little check on that one. If you feed the horse enough oats, Some will pass through to the road for the sparrows, everyone. Doesn't that sound lovely? I can't get my breath. Can you, Adam and Eva? Can you believe her? Jeez. The idea is that extreme wealth concentrated on a small minority will eventually trickle down to everyone else. Well, here's news to the word to the wise. It doesn't work. Because by the time the money reaches the people at the bottom of the money pyramid, it's lost its purchasing power, as we pointed out at the beginning. The public are now confused as to why our political leaders have allowed this to happen, and quite naturally are now asking, why? Because our political processes are badly flawed. They're badly flawed because of the dependence on lobbyists, on campaigning such as contributions. That's why, in our view, and a view I think a lot of other people hold, is that we have to restructure our political processes to give more voice to the ordinary man and less voice to the interest groups, to the money, to groups, to those who have taken such a large role in shaping our tax code or regulatory regulations and so forth. We've got the issues with Democrats and Republicans. They're both beholden to corporate interests. We've got the red and the blue, Conservative and Labour. They need to become unbeholden to those corporate interests. We will never have a well-governed anything until that is true. We're going to the borderline and talk about terrorism. Political language is designed to make lies sound truthful and murder respectable, and to give an appearance of solidarity to pure wind. That's George Orwell. The inherent inequity in our system of money, banking and politics has not just had consequences domestically, but on a massive scale globally. Western leaders have presented their military campaign in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan as moral, a moral obligation. God told me to free them, and other such bullshizing. Are there other reasons for it, we think? Many, yes. One, the first financial beneficiary of the United Kingdom's or America's foreign policy is the military, in particular those who supply it with arms and equipment. America and England, special relationship, troops, and the military has won wars, but how successful has it been in its bigger aim to eradicate terrorism, and initiates? The drone attacks not only failed, but they seem to sometimes create what's called extra extremism. Let's look at it. They've helped in the radicalisation in the northwest frontier and also certain parts of Punjab and Pakistan previously, not right now. And because time after time, and sometimes, there's a feeling that America, England, they do this deliberately. At the minute, it seems to be America poking, so I put them first. We're both as bad as each other. To destabilise countries, nations, in this instance, previously Pakistan. I'm not so sure, but I certainly think those people who actually support these policies, every time you kill 10 of the so-called terrorists, you will create 500 more, in their wake. They see the drone attacks as an attack on a sovereign state of Pakistan, essentially. If they really wanted to flush out terrorists, there's no need for huge military operations in SWAT, causing the entire district to become full of internally displaced man, children, women, families. The population of SWAT is 1.8 million. There are 2.3 million refugees in the country. The whole district, that's right, I know I said 1.8 million and 2.3 million refugees in the country. The whole district has been emptied. This wouldn't be necessary if they had carried out a surgical commando operation to get the leaders. But they allowed them to escape, all of them. After the military, the next financial beneficiary are those who win the contracts. To conduct the rebuilding process, the rebuild, In the West, people might feel optimistic when they hear the UK and the US is pumping tens of billions of newly created pounds and dollars into developing nations to build infrastructures. Often this too doesn't seem to achieve the publicised goals. Is there another reason we give these countries aid? Economic hitmen have created the world's first truly global empire, and we've done it primarily without the military. They work in many different ways, but perhaps the most common is that they will take a third world country that has resources that corporations covet, like oil, then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organisations, However, the money actually never goes to the country. Instead, it will go to their own corporations to build infrastructure projects in that country. What, like power plants, highways, industrial parks, things that benefit a few wealthy families in that country as well as our corporations, but don't help the majority of people at all. Diddly squat. They're too poor. You know, Africa, they'll never get no help properly because they're too poor to buy iPads and to consume and to get up into the westernisation of it. So they're too poor to buy electric, drive cars on the highways, don't have the skills to get jobs in industrial parks, but they're left holding the debt. Oh yes, they're good for something. Infrastructure, which is used, heavy loans from the World Bank and IMF and made from grants from Western countries. They've all got into benefiting the elite and the feudal classes, and they've not benefited the people at all. A lot of money goes to consultants. You've just heard recently how much of UK government money has gone to consultants for PPE that's been in the news at the minute. Millions for middlemen. When you're thinking about, well, I'll tie it back into the Anglo and to across the pond simultaneously. It goes to consultants and companies from the West who charge huge amounts of money, and actually the real money on projects and ordinary people is very limited. Actually, you know, as they've said, the masses have had little already. So those landlords have the infrastructure and who are going to make money because of the infrastructure that is built through their roads. They will prosper. But the ones who don't have any resources, they've not had jobs, there isn't an economic activity for them in terms of manufacturing goods so they can sell and they could also prosper. When you don't have that, what do you do? What do? They resort to joining the Taliban because they see the enemy coming in and taking away what little bit they have. As I've said at the beginning, remember my disclaimer. President Obama, understand, he wanted to invest about $7.5 billion in Pakistan in infrastructure to elevate property, take away all of the divisions and the anti-American sentiment over there, or whatever his reasons were. They didn't want it. In fact, it was the worst possible thing he could look at doing. That kind of help is actually going to be a hindrance. It will just make matters worse. It will bring this contrived war and terror into rural areas. How much of US and UK foreign policy is genuinely altruistic, and how much is it influenced by the banks and corporations that profit so tremendously and unwholly from it? Yes. The United Kingdom and America, Britain, England, evangelism of democracy is riddled with contradictions, not least of which is the idea of promoting democracy at the point of a gun or opposing regimes which are democratic but not in the way that man wants it. So to this idea, promoting free market capitalism has also been riddled with contradictions, because the reality is firms tend to make the most money when countries are at the cusp of change. Certainly financial firms, and in a sense they want markets that are changing structurally but are not too free and too transparent, because they make money when markets are a little bit opaque like. Is it any wonder developed nations are fighting in undeveloped countries when so many are making so much money out of it without ever really having to face up to or even witness the consequences of their actions? You know, there's like a lot of children, assets, family members die in Africa because of debt, and bankers getting bonuses of £1 million, and people have conversations with them. Bankers been in the business a long time and they don't seem to care. You know, a lot of terrorists have quoted, you know, economic hitmen have put commentaries in, and they say that these terrorists don't want to be terrorists. They want to be with their families back on the farm. They're not calling themselves terrorists. They are labelled terrorists. They call themselves freedom fighters. They are driven to freedom fight because they've lost their farm. It has been inundated with water from a hydroelectric project or oil from oil derricks. The farm has been destroyed and they can't make a living for their family. Or in the case of Somali pirates, their fishing waters have been destroyed, and that's why they've turned into this. It isn't because they grew up wanting to be pirates or terrorists. Now, there may be a few crazy people. We're not going to argue there. There are a few crazy people with their nuts well and truly loose. There'll always be serial killers. There will always be crazy people. Maybe Terrorists, some of them are actually crazy. They do not get a following though unless there is a terrible misinjustice going on. People, man, family, clan, tribes are starving and that they are deprived of human rights. Then they will start to follow these crazy people because they seem to offer somewhat of an alternative. If we would like to really, one and truly do away with terrorism, we wanted to have an effective United Kingdom, a United States, and you wanted to have a thing called secure home security, homeland security, as they say across the pond. You've got to recognise that the whole freaking planet is our homeland, and we've got to secure it all as one. Hence me taking the time on this Sunday to read you these 27 pages, 12,845 words, page 17 of 27, for those that are in the long run, doing it all in one chunk. Another hour left, I imagine. What does the word terrorist actually mean? Many terrorists would sooner describe themselves as freedom fighters. Could it be that the charge of terrorism could just as easily be made against Western corporations, speculators and policymakers? When we talk about terrorism, it means what they do to us, not what we do to them. And what they do to us can be pretty ugly, although it's not even a fraction of what we can do to them. Take 9/11. It was a pretty serious act of terrorism, portrayed as. RIP, I make no light of that. It's probably the worst single act of terrorism in history. And, there are other actions that could have happened there. For example, Al-Qaeda allegedly involved, had bombed Washington, the White House. Maybe they had taken out the president at the time. Perhaps they could have installed a harsh military dictatorship, brought in a bunch of economists who drove the economy into its worst disaster in history. That may have been comparable to, doing what they did. I'm just saying, but what happened. What, though, initiates and scribe, what's called the first 9/11, it was in South America, namely in Chile. On the 11th of September 1973, the democratically elected Chilean president Salvador Allende was overthrown in a coup. A dictatorship under Augusto Pinochet was established that ruled Chile into 1990. There was the systemic suppression of all political dissidents. Thousands were imprisoned and murdered. Who was involved in that first 9/11? That's not hard to find them, fam. They are right in Washington and London and so on, all the usual places. That's off the agenda. It doesn't count now. There is a principle of ideology here that we must never look at our own crimes. On the other hand, we should exult in the crimes of others and in our own nobility in opposing them. The root causes of so-called terrorism will not be solved by increasing economic inequality. If governments really are serious about combating terrorism, then they must start with the real structural reform back home. Listen up, Club of Rome. As long as banking empires chase infrastructure and debt deals in pursuit of profit, then us in the West will continue to export injustice through finance. Millions more will be displaced, terrorism will thrive, and neo-colonialism will continue to end more and more lives around the world. Or as David Icke puts it, the totalitarian tiptoe. Totalitarianism, resources. The things you own end up owning you, or will end up owning you. What's happened is that we have moved, isn't it, from a relatively empty world into a relatively full world, isn't it? That is empty of us and all of our stuff to now full of us and full of all of our stuff. Yes, in my lifetime the world population may have tripled, and the populations of other things like cars, houses, boats, computers, commodities, microwave cookers, small media devices, mobile telephones, all these are the things that put a load on the environment too, just like man's body, the body corpse. Those have vastly more than tripled, so the world is very, very full of what we might call man-made rubbish, capital, and is becoming more and more empty of what used to be there, what we might call natural capital, resources. A non-sectarian remedy where we declare all the real world's resources, man's common heritage again, is on the cusp. We are the first generation. We are in the rich, developed right of the first generation to have got to the end of the real benefits of economic growth. For hundreds of years, the best way of raising the real quality of human life has been to raise material living standards. And that's what's driven the huge rises in life expectancy and increases in happiness and other measures of well-being. At the moment, though, life expectancy has gone down 10 years for women in some areas of our landmass. SPLs have noted and have got a concern due to the quality of human life going down again at this moment, hence us incorporating this, taking the time out and letting you know, we know and we see. All those have now come detached from economic growth, and although life expectancy continue to rise in the rich world, it's no longer related to the amount of economic growth the country has at all. And the same is true of measures of happiness and the measures of well-being. The paradox is the more we grow, the more poverty we create. Our self-interested economic system seems to be continuously missing a trick. So as we keep plundering the Earth's natural capital, is it time to rethink our Western definition of progress? When I take a look at the world, I look much at the world as the way a company, Royal Dutch Shell, looked at it. They have one of the best strategic entities in the world, private or public. And the Royal Dutch Shell is posted two scenarios. One is called Blueprint and is obviously a planned corporate structure where world leaders get together and they think about things like energy transformation, planetary warming, dwindling fossil fuels and so forth. And the other is Scramble. And Scramble is pretty much what it sounds like. It's a mess. Interestingly enough, in 2075, the year ending for these scenarios as is depicted, we get to about the same place. It's just that Blueprint leaves a lot less blood on the floor. Scrambled, there's a lot of blood on the floor as people fight for these resources and so forth. The reason oil companies are drilling miles under the sea initiates is that the world's easily accessible oil has already been found and largely consumed. Not only are oil supplies dwindling, major new metals discovery are becoming increasingly rare. 40% of the world's agricultural land is seriously degraded and ever more volatile yields continue to be unevenly distributed. The locusts and the such things as and the freak weather patterns, crops are wiped out by hailstones the size of tennis balls, footballs, crushing flowers, pollination not happening. You'd be surprised at what happens to wipe out crops and weird weather patterns and freak things and unplanned precedented water levels. So temperatures fluctuating. It's you need to look. It may be that the looming environmental threat is not global warming but the exhaustion of the world's resources. Greta, I'm not really echoing anything that's been said there, but it is noted. We take more than we can put back. We are doing things as per corporations, poisoning ways, and enough is enough. We're going to have struggles for finding land soon sufficient to grow agricultural products for what the United Nations says is going to be a 9 billion Earth population. We're going to struggle over non-renewable fossil fuels as they indeed run out and the carbon debt that comes with that. If there is such a thing, I think Shell deposits about 2075, they'll all be gone, it was written. We're going to struggle over things like water and other precious resources that are a necessity to our life and to our economies. It could be that the blueprint of fair world leaders working together to share and share alike, or it could be a real mess. And incidentally, I bet on the mess. Just like the baby boomers' failure to look after the next generation, our outdated competitive mentality for a world of depleted resources could have devastating consequences. Our economic setup encourages one-upmanship. It encourages competition and comparison, whereas the progress humans have made over millennia has been largely based on cooperation, on community, on a tribal family affair, not in secular singularity. In any species, in almost any animal, there is always the potential for huge conflict, because with any species, all members of that species have the same needs. I know they don't, Dave. What if they're less able? Okay, some need a little bit more, but generally they all have the same. None, they're equal. So they might fight each other for food, shelter, nests, sites, territory, and sexual partners, all that kind of thing. But human beings have always had the other possibility. We have the possibility to be the best source of support and love and assistance and cooperation. Much more so than any other animal. Sorry, animals, but I think that's right. I would argue, though, and I hear voices shouting, no, actually, come here, Dave, look at our Tess. Tess, give him a kiss. Much more so than any other animal. And so other people can be the best or the worst. You can be my worst rival, my trill, my enemy, or my best source of support. In a progressive society, to meet our common economical, social and cultural needs, we must move from globalisation to localisation. The benefits of a communal sense of camaraderie, aka fellowship, but we're off the boats, we're on the land, so we don't have fellowship. We have common unity, responsibility, purpose in life, procreators, driven by production, not consumption. That would lead to happiness and satisfaction. I bet my bottom penned note on that. Indeed, we must ask, have our modern consumerist lifestyles, have they made us happy so far? I think it would have been living in the 19th century and somebody told you 100 years later people were going to be living in this extraordinary wealth and, you know, luxury and comfort with central heating and being able to throw away such high proportion as our food as what we do. We'd probably imagine that we'd be living in a state of extraordinary social harmony and everything will be rosy. And it's quite remarkable the contrast between, if you like, the material success of our societies and the social failure. The growth economy demands that we make consumption a way of life. It's all about consuming. It must be bigger, faster, better. He who dies with the most toys became the ambition, and retail replaced spiritual satisfaction. Unsurprisingly, sales of antidepressants seem to have skyrocketed in prescriptions. The fact is they are sales, though. We don't even know they're on prescriptions. Someone's getting rich from that misery, so we call them sales. The fact is that the world economy over the last few years, a good share of our lifetimes has been built either on the military or on producing items that most people don't need. They don't even want when we come right down to it, but we've all got to have them. Consumerism is driven by exponentially social nature that it's driven by extraordinary social nature that we want to have the stuff so we look good in other people's eyes, you know, imagery, keeping up with the Joneses. It's because we experience ourselves through other people's eyes, the feelings of shame and embarrassment or pride and maybe the feeling of being envied and all those things. So, you know, the goods are just a way of, if you like, mediating a relationship between yourself and others, strangers, in this extraordinary alienated hierarchy, social hierarchy. What's really suffered is our family, our clans, our security, our self-esteem, our prosperity, the things that really matter to us. And in the end, you know, the only thing that makes human beings happy isn't money, as we're finding out within lockdowns and the legislation and legal secular codes that are being mandated out of Westminster upon your legal person by default. We're finding out that now the simplest things in life are very near and dear and true to us. It's very clear, especially from the past, a certain level, you only get marginal gains from wealth compared to what you can get from immaterial gains, immaterial things and the gains from them. What really makes man happy is other man. It's our connection with other man, consciousness. That's really being damaged by the last 30 years, and especially this last year in 2020. It's been smashed in like a glass house being hit by a big meteor shower. We trust them less. We trust man less. We have less interaction with man. We bond less ever before. Man marries less. Marriages are more under threat than ever before. Religion itself is capsizing along with the economy, like a dead fish rolling over and bloating out. I'm sorry if you've had a dead fish recently, but you get the imagery there. And all the associations that represent sort of permanent, unconditioned human affections are being eroded and damaged. And that's the real legacy of the last 30 years, austerity. In some sense, we've got to recover. We need to re-energize our lives, get back to source code. Otherwise, not only will man be subject to a nasty, brutish and short time existence, but you'll be lonely as well. In the West, we're coming to the realization that its human project is failing. The West was so convinced that if you push people to achieve as individuals, then that accumulated achievement of individuals would make for a successful society. And what the West is now beginning to realise is that the individual achievement without incorporating the vulnerable community is a myth. The idea was make your own life, be individually aspiring, and then you'll be individually achieving, and then you'll be individually prosperous, and then you'll be individually happy. Yes, everybody, isn't it lovely? Well, what they don't tell us is you'll end up doing that in a glass jar. And the glass jar has a limited height, and it's encapsulating, and in the end, you die from the lack of oxygen because someone's put the lid on it. Human beings are alive. Man is alive because they seek attachment, ultimately, and because they are propelled by affection. And so the isolated, achieving individual in the end will indeed implode. Human resources. It's you've got a shelf life as a human resource. Humans are not goddamn resources, so help me now. In order to find a purpose in life, it's to serve a higher self, higher purpose. The purpose of life is to serve a higher source. And in order to find a purpose in life, it has to be outside oneself. It matters not how you construct it outside oneself, as long as it is positive value added to society pursuit. It has to be outside oneself. It cannot be oneself. That's as simple as that can be put. If you're pursuing oneself, you're pursuing the abyss. As Nietzsche said, you are going to wind up in the abyss, abyss, abyss. We're going on to another little segment now, which is called Progress. I have never let my schooling interfere with my education. Who said that? You should know this by now. It was one of Nikolai Tesla's best buddies. He might have been a bit of a writer. He might have been an English man at the time. Is it a man called Mark Twain? Never the Mark Twain. What are the best powerful cultural frameworks that shapes the way that man thinks today? I ask you initiates. In the West, it is the Hollywood film construction unit known as Hollywood spellcasting blockbusters. It is indeed a culture of its own, another living, breathing entity. And it follows a particular cultural pattern in that there is a beginning, there is a middle, and there is indeed an end. I like the Japanese and Asian films and horrors and so forth just because the structure of the film, it just takes you places where you wouldn't think you'd be going. Battle Royale, The Eye, Ju-on, Grudge, Creep, what one with the soldiers, the anime, the Studio Ghibli collection, Akira, first anime, etc. So I'll rest it there. But in Hollywood, there's drama, there's tension with resolution, there's usually a goodie, there's a baddie, there's usually a story to hold the medium of human beings. There's Hollywoodization of the way that man communicates and the way they tell stories about themselves. And view their recent history has very much impacted on how man's consciousness now looks at financial crisis and pandemic times, in that people look at the beginning, the middle, and indeed the possible endings. They look at the drama. Let's take the Lehman Brothers, as they wanted to say a resolution, or the 2009 crash. And they wanted a resolution, and they wanted baddies, and they wanted sacrificial victims as well. Somebody must pay. People focus on a few individuals and the idea that somehow it wasn't just one or two individuals who are at the root of the problem. It's generally a systemic problem that actually almost everyone who participates is in some way guilty. As I said earlier, by us all using promissory notes, once you're in the knowledge of this information and you know about the mechanics and the truth and the offshore tax havens and the theft and the fraud and the deception and all that we're going into, then we're all in some way guilty, either out of negligence or simply failing to ask the right questions or simply failing to answer. Why is money so cheap for so many years? The idea that it was a systemic flaw is something which is very hard for people to grasp, and it's even more harder to depict as a good story. Perhaps there is this feeling of helplessness because man doesn't understand what the real problem actually is. You know, cleansing a few bad apples will not rectify the flaws at the heart of Western economic systems. A system that should indeed be there to protect the man, people, constitutionally speaking, is in fact the very entity that's enabling the alleged, effectively the four horsemen to ride with such vengeance. Why are you mentioning horsemen, David? Listen, the modern day four horsemen are rapacious financial systems, escalating organised violence, abject poverty for billions, and the exhaustion of the earth's resources. They are all riding roughshod over those who can least afford it. They gallop unchallenged because the cognitive map that's been put in place by our schools' indoctrinations, the universities and the media outlets does not encourage man to question the accepted norms. Instead, there is nothing but apathy, apathy, apathy. In a sense, I think we're rather depressed societies, cultures, civilizations and clans. We've got used to the idea that there's nothing that can be done. There is no alternative. We're never going to deal with these environmental problems, and we live in a dog-eat-dog society, and that's all we can say. I think that what we can take away from this is recognition that most of the problems can be substantially improved by making our societies more equal, reducing the income differences, and that also will then help us to solve some environmental problems. We can perhaps reach a society that is qualitatively better for all of us. Heaven forbid. Will the apathy is sort of engineered because you don't have any discussion in the public media? Hardly by surprise, the public media are owned by the real estate and the financial interests. They're not going to explain to the peoples, the integration between financial, insurance and real estate sectors. That would be FIRE, financial, F, insurance, I, real, yes, and R, estate, E, so FIRE, FIRE, financial, insurance, real estate sectors, the FIRE sector, as it's known, for those in the corporate financial banking, bond and Wall Street area. There is information going on, passing the buck, denying what the real driving factors are. All of these common strategies, in fact, even in education, you can see that banks have helped to set up universities that funded them. They fund think tanks. They have educational foundations. They own newspaper. All of this stuff is going on, kind of propaganda exercise, so that man don't actually work out what is what. They know what is what, but they don't know what is what. They just strut what the propagandas. You should have a propaganda. Take a look. Have a propaganda at the propaganda. You should not assume because you should not assume because you don't know or you don't have a background in economics or law that these issues are somehow far too complex for ye. They are not complex at all. Let me tell you now, initiates, if you're still with me, thank you. Bless up. And it is very simple. It's about power, number one. It's about democracy, number two. And you understand that just as well as I do. So welcome and let's get on. One source of this disinformation is the neoclassical school of economics, okay? When I've said about the King's Royal Colleges and things like that, that's the neoclassical school of economics. When you think, well, who is the neoclassical school of economics, David? Oxford, Harvard, Eton, they're taught differently at these private public schools there. And then we've got the indoctrination as well. So one source of disinformation is the indoctrination of the nation through the neoclassical school of economics. These economists and academics have been successful in convincing man that their models were gospel. But just as Gutenberg's printing press, not gut, it's goo, G-U is goo, just as Gutenberg's printing press was revolutionary in the 16th century, today we're at the dawn of internet's enlightenment, which will remove the cloud of ignorance upheld by the academic and the media gatekeepers. Education can be a form of mass mind control, that's with a K, and it's astonishing that today neoclassical economics continues to be taught in all universities. We'll leave that bit out. I'll leave that bit out. We're skipping there. When you go to uni, what they're teaching you is what you're going to have to oppose, essentially. A lot of it. Some of it may be useful. Some of it's useful. Go ahead and learn it. You know why? Because the other reason for learning it is it's know your enemy, like what we've done. Use their own rules against them. An individual might not be able to change the system, but what they can do is become a sovereign initiate, a master of self, and they can look at educating fundamentally, and you know yourself, you grow yourself, you show yourself. Yes, so to know yourself, it's a step, it's a pathway, and when you're ready to learn, the teacher will appear. You cannot change the realm, but the individual, you cannot change the system, you can change yourself. And if we're not offered proper education, we must begin our own, hence the building for SPLSpro.com, this little place here, and the cast that Kevin and I and the fam do on Tube of the U. So we must begin our own education, and a good place to start to become acquainted with the classical economists. Okay, that's one place to have a good look at, and with something that so few question but that affects us all, our system of money. They didn't teach you about it at school. No, they didn't, me either. There's a reason for that, everyone. If the monetary system of the world is not now reformed, we are all, mankind is headed towards the end of an industrial civilization, I shit you not. I won't say that we're going to the end of humanity, but it's going to be absolute collapse of our world as we have known it, because it cannot function on fiat, fake money. And none of those who are responsible for this want to admit it, but that is the fact. Fact checkers, check that. The fiat system of money is man-made law, and it has been abused. We can prove that. You can prove that. Is there a form of money, David, whose law is not set by man? I'm going to ask you, initiates. I'm going to ask the question you've mentally asked me back at you. Is there a form of money whose law is not set by man? Answers on the screen. There is one. Allegedly. We've got a proposition. I think some of you will get it. When you look at natural law and gold, we sort of describe gold as being a natural form of money. All of the gold that's been mined throughout history still exists in its above ground stock today. If we collected it up, it would amount to the size of 2.5 Olympic swimming pools. If you put all that gold together in one place, that is. The key is that this above ground stock of gold grows by about 1 3/4% per annum, which is approximately equal to new world population growth and is approximately equal to new wealth creation. So as the net result of this is that you have this very good consistency in gold's purchasing power over long periods of time, because the supply-demand equation is very much in balance. To achieve human liberty, that's because we're all worth our weight in gold, and they have to keep drawing it out every time man is produced. Look, boom! To achieve human liberty, you really need to have sound money, and gold is the only way, one of the only ways to do that, because gold is outside the control of politicians. Gold, I hear what you're saying. I'm not even looking at the screen, but you're telling me there's a gold bullion backed crypto coin coming out. Dead. Crypto, don't trust it because of the death word attached to it, but possibly, more likely, which is why I'm doing this, fully aware of it. With modern man-made monetary processes, a chronic excessive debt has built up at every level of society. Debt is now regarded as normal. Well, listen, initiates, here at SPLS Pro, we say debt is not normal. It isn't. It's a form of slavery. But how much do we question our debt, and what should we do now about it? Well, man's committing suicide about it, selling their properties, splitting up, divorcing, becoming dependent on alcohol. It's terrible state of circle of doom. The classic example, most recently, of a debt cancellation was the German economic miracle in 1947. There was also a Swedish one where they quantitatively eased the population, I'd like to draw in. But yeah, we'll carry on with this one. The Allies cancelled all domestic and international German debts, except for the debts that employers owed for their employees. The previous few weeks, and except for a basic working balance so that everybody was to keep the bank in order to buy food for the next few weeks or so. So essentially, you would follow the 5 or 6 pages that the currency reform of 1947 did in Germany initiates. You would start with a clean slate, a debt amnesty, because there is no money and we could get out of debt. I was speaking with Robert from the observation deck, and this is partly influenced by that man there as well. Not influenced in the form of the body of the content. I had a chat with him. We talked about debt and debt amnesty briefly, and I thought I must put that into the latter part of the fake money, fix it again tomorrow, fiat. So you'd start with a clean slate. That means everybody would own their property essentially free and clear. The problem here is that you'd probably wipe off the savings that are the counterparts of that. That would actually not, be such a bad thing if you look at the fact that the wealthiest 1% have concentrated an enormous amount of wealth in their own hands, more than at any earlier time since statistics have been started. The system of taxation also needs addressing. Currently, man is taxed, persons are taxed, man is not taxed, legal persons are taxed, and on what we produce. Perhaps it would be more progressive to tax what is consumed. If ever any tax was to be invented, we can argue about tax later. We don't agree with it. I don't condone it. I don't think there should be any tax at all, and neither does SPLSpro.com. We know the truth. But if there has to be a tax, and there must be a tax, and you want to try and consume, say like building materials, okay, and they're used quite a lot, and they're just thrown about, bits of copper piping, skip, things that could be recycled because they're giving it cheap, tax-free, so perhaps we should tax what we consume, and corporations that consume a lot would naturally pay more taxes. And when you go to work, you've got the outcome is money, not the income. And income, the input is your sweat, equity, your labour, your time. The output is credit for money. In a man in a true sovereign capacity can never be taxed. Chapter 11 bankruptcy, this is why we're here. So it's a big issue that we're going to be forming in the private exemption from that. Freedom of information. Kevin's got a document he's working on just to put the stinkers up the HMRC about what go on with regards to all of this. So stand by for action late December, early New Year. How many mans realise that the common law, initially the founding nations, the USA would be the founding fathers, never intended man to be taxed on their labour at all. They weren't meant to pay income tax ever. The tax system that was exported from Britain, a relic of colonialism, has duped the world, to be fair. Anybody that's getting taxed, it's exported from Britain, a relic of colonialism. The most important element of a tax system is to do what everybody expected to be done in the 19th century, and that is to base the tax system on land taxation, on the free lunch of land value, and on what John Stuart Mill called the unearned increment, the income that landlords make in their sleep, as he put it. Who made the oil in the ground? Coal or iron ore. These are the minerals and resources which are not the products of human effort. When we say there's a share and a claim and a right, in the good book there, it says that we are given the dominion. All right, there's claim to be had. Claim of right isn't about claiming a CQV. That's not where the money is, I'm afraid. You want to know how come your worth and the weight in gold and the money and the equitable interest. It's a long journey, but we help straighten that out for you. So, of course, extracting them is expensive, but their existence is not. Man that's paying for water isn't paying for water. You're paying for water charges for the company to deliver the water and process it and poison it and bring it to your house. So they claim. And so the rents from the natural resources are a wonderful source of taxation. Nobody made them. And so when you tax them, you cause all of us to use them more efficiently. This seems like really the logical thing to tax rather than labour and capital. Hello. If the government used this land site value that's supplied by nature, not by human labour, not by personal enterprise effectively, then the government would not have to tax wages in the form of income tax. Supplementary to what we've said throughout the course of this massive, epic study. It wouldn't have to employ sales tax to add to the price of doing business. It wouldn't have to, the proliferation of business taxes. The tax system advocated by the classical economists would begin to address global poverty, as it would allow citizens in developing countries to keep their resource wealth. In developed countries, it would begin to address housing and debt crisis. This would be a transitional period, what we're talking about, if they needed one, to swap over to some kind of balanced, normal wipeout, as I've said, in the 1947 with the Germans. It would unleash the kind of entrepreneurship needed to re-afloat the economies. Perhaps, we should also resurrect another timeless principle for workers that was promoted during the Industrial Revolution. The idea that people that work in a factory or plant should own it. It is just deeply built into working class culture right around in the early industrial revolutionary times, in the late 19th century, working people simply took for granted that, yes, of course, the workers should own the property in which they worked. Generally, it was mills then, I'd say. Anything else is an attack on man's fundamental rights, unalienable rights as man, as free souls, as free flames. They also took for granted that wage labour is hardly different from slavery. This is all voluntary, when you go in to apply for a job and you submit a form, you've submitted your rights, you've signed with full liability, and therefore you've gone to apply. There are many ways to exist and to try to claim rights, inheritance, incomes, estates and that, but in this case we're just going with the general consensus. I'm neither promoting, in fact I don't promote to work and have a job, the Hebrew curse word, but this is how it is. So we're speaking hypothetically upon modern times, and with the view of transitional points and cancellations there, for the ones that are very, very attentive and intuitive. It's different, let's say they took for granted that wage labour is hardly different from slavery on that segue, yeah? They knew that voluntary wage labour, sweat equity, is hardly different from forced slavery. Volunteering for a job is hardly different from slavery. I've said it now 3 times in different ways. It's different, why? Only because it's temporary. And then you can be free when the bell goes. One of the ways and be free is by owning your own plants. That was not an exotic view. That was actually a man called Abraham Lincoln. He viewed that fact. There was a principle of the Republican Party in the late 19th century. A Republican principle there. I'm not saying that I'm a Republican or a Democrat. I'm just saying I'm neither. We should lead yourself. Self-govern is what I am. So what I'm saying is, though, that was a Republican Party principle. It's taken a lot of effort over a lot of years to drive those principal ideas out of people's heads, but they're still there in the background and they're very relevant. It was the Greek philosopher Plato who said the ratio of earnings between the highest and lowest paid employee in any organisation should be no more than 6 to 1. But in 1923, banker J.P. Morgan declared no more than, drumroll, 20 to 1 was optimum. Yet today, 2020, salary differences between the top and bottom earners in global corporations can be higher than 500 or 1,000 to 1. When you're up in the range of 500 to 1, inequality, the rich and the poor become almost different species, no longer members of the same community. Commonality of interest is lost, and it is then difficult to form community and to have good friendly relationships across class differences that are that large. When the public do vent their outrage at inappropriate earnings, the common defence is to move the debate to the psychological realm and quote mercurial British economist now then Herbert Spencer. He coined the phrase survival of the fittest, and his words are now used to justify excess. Excess competition in business is a good thing, but the playing field must indeed be level. Monopolists have too much because the system, their game is rigged under the current economic setup. The fitness of the vast majority of the world's population is irrelevant. Those that are made to pay for this crisis are those that caused it, or not those that caused it, sorry. Those who caused it for survival will no doubt try to marginalise this study as socialist or even as a Marxist study. But there are many out there that are capitalists, business people, men, entities that believe in the basic principles, and they're completely appalled by seeing these principles destroyed by monopolists who have totally destroyed the system from within on Bond Street and Wall Street. Whoa. And this is completely unacceptable. I think I'll always say, whoa. I am not a capitalist or anything. I'm not promoting any of this. I'm just bringing it to you in the various forms from history and money and control and banking and oligarchs and, capitalism. Some people say that it's a great thing, but we've got lots of isms and schisms. A system reformed of reformed capitalism built on independent money, a tax system based on consumption, not income, and an employee-owned business would begin to build an economy that's not dependent on consistent growth to service its debt. You know, we've had it good, but you see what we're pointing out is what's been stripped away. We've endured the so-called free market for centuries, but far from being free, it's led man to destroy nature and now each other in a vain attempt to progress. It's absolutely ludicrous to suggest that somehow there is a scientifically defined boundary of the market that man should never change. And then, of course, that is not what the free market want man to believe, because once, you know, that they convince you of that, and claim that on top of the claim that they have the truth because they are, you know, a PhD in economics, then they can pretty much tell us whatever they want and we would have to accept it. Well, that's where we have to now take this on. Politics is about drawing the boundary of the market. When you think about this lot, you know, of things, when you think about it, there's a lot of things that have been taken out of the market in the last 2 or 3 centuries. You could buy and sell human beings, child labour, and many other things that you could possibly imagine. You could perhaps, you know, buy and sell then. But over time we have redrawn this boundary, okay? And there's nothing wrong with redrawing that boundary again today. Things that were considered absolutely reasonable in the 1850s, like selling any chemical on a street corner, telling man that it's a pharmaceutical drug and it will make good for you. Things like that were absolute commonplace then are now serious criminal offences, okay? Well, the same thing would be true of active money management in the last 100 years. The breakdown we saw in the Great Depression and witnessed again at the beginning of the 21st century occurred because in the name of growth, much was taken out of the system by those that contribute the little, very little, the least. Multinational corporates and banks will always want to grow without having to compensate those people who actually do the work to produce the surplus. In the past, every time too much was taken by those who contributed too little, you know, we've got the 7 Hermetic principles there. Have a look at them little beauties. People, you know, rose up to halt the violent practices enacted by a tangible enemy. Today the question is, with such a formless enemy pervading every element of our economic and democratic processes, can it be done again? It looks like they're cycles. You know, we're not debt peons, but maybe we've been rats running around a little bit in the wheel, someone's big cage somewhere, but we're broken out of that now. Finance, it rises, finance becomes organised. You make a lot of money in banking, it's easy to go out and buy politicians, but the essence of democracy in action, the essence of England, Anglo, Britain, American, European democracy is a repeated confrontational, repeated showdown. You know, let's look at 1830s. Andrew Jackson beat the second bank, United States. In the early 1900s, Teddy Roosevelt beats J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller. In 1930s, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR baby, beat everybody from Wall Street. All right, now you initiates and we have to do that again. Are you ready? Okay, are you ready? Selector. Kevin with a rewind, bass track coming up. We'll talk about money, money. We'll talk about money, money. What was that? Dirty cash, I want you. Dirty cash, I need you. Oh, Stevie V. Let's go with Stevie V. The one thing that makes me optimistic rather than cynical, pessimistic. You know, I don't see many with a desire to be a Wall Street or Bond Street or some kind of financial man now. There's no a yearning for greed, there's a yearning for solidarity. We're all capable of transforming our world. Revolutions, our philosophical, you know, getting organised and preventing the culprits, camouflaging the real problem, means it's possible to embark on a bloodless revolution. I said bloodless revolution against the violent organisations and the barbaric leaders, barbarians, I found that word in India, barbaric leaders who have trashed the economy, central banking, wrecked capitalism, land speculation, income tax and neoclassical economics of corporate democracy, stunted, retarded, arrested development, progress stunted, perverted the course of human destiny, and compromised the future of this planet. Mankind, the three realms, the three kingdoms of man, plants and animals. If these issues aren't addressed soon, the next implosion will be on a scale unimagined. When I say we're in unprecedented times, whatever the propaganda at the beginning of the 21st century, banks, unregulated cheap money, pumped up land values, which created an unsustainable asset bubble. In a world that once again operates a rigged tax system that enriches the entrenched privileged, neoclassical economics have ruined life for the bottom billions, tempted everybody into intergenerational conflict, and created massive suffering that indeed seems to have no fecking limits. Man has been, and authentic beings go mad in crowds and come to their senses slowly and individually. History is littered with examples of people who threw themselves off the yoke of oppression to adopt radical change, only to end up with popular new rulers that maintain the status quo. To really understand something is to be freed from it. Dedicating oneself to a great cause, taking responsibility, gaining self-knowledge, becoming a master and initiate of self is the essence of being man. A predatory capitalist truest enemy and humanity's greatest ally is the self-educated sovereign master of self, individual, I am, man, I and I, who has read, who has king stand, understand, overstand, innerstand, comprehended, who delays their gratification and walks around with their eyes wide open. That is what it means to be initiate of self, private, lawful, self-governing, good, sovereign status. I yield and drop the handset, the mouse, keyboard and everything. We're finished. Bum Shanker might even be able to get a quick chat with our Kev, look. I enjoyed that. We have more to come. That's just to skate on the surface again. That just give you some names and times and places and positions and movements. And this video on YouTube, it will have a link in it tomorrow added with the 5-hour hangout I had with myself, where I go into the corporate city of London, the Lord Mayor and all of the banking there, and I believe it's got the Spider's Web documentary in with that 5 hours, so we can then go Anglo in depth for the concise articulation of what's gone off here, comparable to this. And I think both of those will give you for across the pond and on Anglo lands a comprehensive insight into what go on and how things are. This is forward motion of the 21st of the 12th 2020, and what we have got planned for the private era. You had BCE before Great JC, then JC appeared and was the event happened. Then we had CE, BCE before Common Era, JC 0 to 33. After that was just the time. I don't know what that was, 0 to 33. CE Common Era then. Now we're going from Common Era to the private era, PE. All right, so much love, thank you. It has been fun. I do enjoy this. Claire, Ian. Sorry, Sovereign, but thank you for the feedback. I'm going to download and put onto the tube line. Just take the Roman Empire, for instance. They merely changed the cloak they wore and started preaching the gospel, and then to claim that their elected leader was Jesus' personal representative on earth. Oh, beautiful. Thank you, Rob. Bless up, Steve. Anthony Bourdain knew more than he should. Thank you. Chef is here. Interesting point. Stop talking about the chefs. Gary, Lisa, SR Kev, Dean, Steve. There we go. We're finished then. Bosh, thank you. Much love. Ciao for now. I enjoyed that.